It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You know what that means. It's time for another episode of #Event. Presented by Endless Events. The show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. So, you might be wondering, how do you get to ask questions? All you have to do is use the question panel on the right of GoToWebinar to submit your questions. Or you can hop on Twitter to submit your questions with the #EventIcons. We'll be answering your questions live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better conversation we can have. So please help share #EventIcons on Twitter and Facebook. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com. Now, without any further delay, this is #EventIcons with your hosts, Will Curran of Endless Events, Laura Lopez of Social Tables, and Brant Kruger of Event Technology Consulting.
All right, everybody. It's good to see you all back here on an episode of Event Icons, where the icons of the event industry come to play. I just made that up. That's not like a good catchphrase. I think we can.
I like that catchphrase quite a bit. I mean, evident by all the dancing. If you're not watching the video, play for sure.
All right, today we are being joined by Martin Shepherdly, who is the director at Be There Global. Hi, Martin.
Hi there. How you doing?
And also Paul Cook, the founder and managing consultant of Planit Limited. And these guys are the authors of Remotely Engaging. Now, this is a book that Will knows about. This is a book that I know about. This is a book that I actually endorsed on the back of the book because this is actually, and I say it on the back of the book, it is actually one of the most concise, easy to understand guides for anyone wanting to extend their reach to a remote audience. Paul, Martin, thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure. And I want to give my endorsement. I'm not on the back of the book, so I'm going to give my third-party, unbiased endorsement and say that this is the book for sure. I think this is a book that all planners need to read. If you're talking anything digital and there's somehow you're bringing in a remote audience, this is a must-read. And I mean, I think this goes to how well these guys can concisely tell you exactly what you need, and it's not verbose in any sort of way. Literally, it's an easy read. This is how thick it is. I highly recommend it. I know we're going to recommend it in the resources thing. I want to give my upfront thing. And the second I read this book, I knew we had to have these guys on the show.
Get the plugs and the fanboy stuff out of the way. So.
Yeah, I'm fangirling actually a little bit right now.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks so much, guys, for joining us. We want to just dive right in before we get, too girlishly giggly on this between Will and I. And so let's start with you, Paul. What got you into the events industry, and what are you doing now with Planit?
Oh, very good question. What got me into the events industry? I actually came in via a insurance background some years ago, and I ended up working at Planit Film Studios. And whilst I was there, I got to see how productions were taken apart, how sets were put together. And I was fascinated by that. And I ended up working for a small event insurance brokerage, and that spurred me on to create my own, which I did. And in doing so, I wanted to find out more about what the pain points were for my clients. And with that in mind, I then started creating resources around event planning. And it was a kind of natural progression from insurance, and then I joined Meeting Professionals International. I took a leadership position in the UK on that. I did some global advisory councils, and then I met a bunch of amazing people, and I've been lucky enough over the past 10 plus years or so to have met some special people with great skills that really help to up the production levels in this industry. So I just find it fascinating. There's always a challenge, and I really enjoy it, and helping people makes me happy.
And Martin, how about you? What got you into the events industry, and what are you doing now there with Be There Global?
Well, imagine a world before the internet.
Imagine a world. I can't imagine that world.
Thank you. I was hoping you would do the voice. I don't have the low levels to do that. Imagine a world before video. Well, that's when I started with slides. Doing the old, what they used to call multivision shows for conferences, and spent many a year producing, moving on to producing events, corporate events all over the world, all sorts of corporate clients launching silly products everywhere. In the heyday of the 80s and 90s, when they had budgets and nobody argued about how much you were going to spend. And had a great time, thoroughly enjoyed it. And then after 20 odd years of doing that, I kind of thought that there's got to be something slightly different. So I found myself in the world I'm in now, which is that of taking other people's events and distributing them, if you like, opening them up to audiences around the globe. That's what Be There Global does.
That's awesome. I'm curious to know what would you both be doing if it wasn't for the events industry? Like, Paul, would you still be insurance? Martin, would you be like a graphic designer? Like, what would you guys think you would be doing? Paul, if you want to kick that off.
Yeah, I kind of fell into insurance, so I wouldn't be doing that again.
Never again.
No, I would be. What would I like to do? Probably do some. Yeah, I'd like to do some reporting. You know, to go out and to be on maybe some dramatic places and just kind of doing the reporting role that people do so brilliantly. So something a bit more adventurous maybe than insurance.
Get you into some jungles and hacking, flashing with a machete.
Well, you know what? Last year I climbed Kilimanjaro, and that was just brilliant. I just loved it, and that kind of thing. Yeah, if I had to go and ride about all those kind of treks, yeah, that'd be awesome.
Awesome. Well, maybe we can somehow combine that with events, and that'll be the dream, right?
Absolutely.
I love it.
Adventure
Mark, what
event.
about you? If you are you a mountain climber yourself? Would you be climbing mountains, or what would you be doing?
Well, I did Kilimanjaro, but quite a few years before Paul, actually, but distant memory. No, I was going to be an art director in an advertising agency. That's what I was all set to do. I did a graphic design college course, and I was all set to do that. And through a contact, I got a couple of weeks freelance work doing storyboards for an AV production company, and I didn't go home for 2 weeks, had the time of my life, and decided that was where I was going to stay. So without the budgets of advertising, perhaps, but without a lot of the stresses and hassles.
Awesome. And I think less stress is something we would all want. So I think that's the only reason why we wouldn't be in the events industry is maybe just save a couple more of our gray hairs, even me getting at my age. So I want to jump right on into this topic because I think it's really important. Obviously, as an AV professional, I'm always down for clients to introduce new technologies and do new things, and especially with this because it's very heavy AV related. But I think there's people out there that might be asking themselves, you know, when it comes to live streaming, virtual audiences, hybrid audiences, remote podcasts, all these different things, which we'll talk, I think, the terminology in a minute. Why do you think that someone should even consider having some sort of virtual audience, live streaming to them, going on Facebook Live, or doing something on GoToWebinar like this, or using any sort of platform? What's the big why? What are the benefits to doing this? You want to kick it off, Paul?
Yeah, I think one of the big benefits is that if you have a venue of any size, it is going to be at some point restricted on how many people you can actually get physically into that location. And I think if you are able to go beyond that and break outside of the conference area or whatever, the exhibition floor, and appeal to people across the globe, then that to us is a good thing because you're spreading the message wider, and you're not limiting yourself. I think the problem is that a lot of events can easily spend a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resource in getting a fantastic event together, but then maybe 10% of the membership gets to value it, and the other 90% are still unable to access, and that for me is one of the big drivers in terms of getting the breadth of the message spread across. And also I think the other main reason is that sometimes you cannot physically get to a location regardless of your best endeavors. I mean, if we look at the ash cloud of some years ago over Europe, I mean, that prevented speakers getting to events over in Poland. It prevented all sorts of people coming in. So we had to find other ways around, and that maybe was a good catalyst for this idea of spreading beyond a region. And I think particularly with some of the political uncertainty that exists in any territory in which we find ourselves, to have these events where you can comfortably enjoy from wherever you happen to be because of this technology, that to me has to be a good thing. So I think it's changed from packing as many people into an area to get good commissions on the food and beverage and the venue space and all of those kind of things for Planets to thinking wider. And I think the other big benefit of these type of events is that you get to record and capture your content. And I think if you are not doing that at a basic level, then you're really missing a big part of the opportunity.
Awesome. I can't agree more. I think for example, even on this show, this wouldn't be possible. We're all spread across the world right now, across the country, everywhere, and this content wouldn't be possible because, hey, if we tried to fly both of you in and Brant come into Phoenix and we sit around my webcam and try to do this live, that wouldn't be possible. Or, I mean, even the attendees, all the people watching us right now on the internet, they could be anywhere, any time zone, and I think that's possible because of obviously the technology. Martin, what are your thoughts? What are the benefits that are there to doing a live stream? Why should someone even consider doing this?
Well, I think the answer is different for every organization depending on what they're trying to achieve. But the fact is, if you're putting a lot of effort and resource into creating an event, and really, if you can, why limit that event? If it's got content that's of any meaningful value, why limit it to the people that can squeeze into the room and the people that happen to be available on that day and time to see it? When, let's face it now, it is so easy, it's so affordable to capture that content that it's crazy not to, really.
So it really is about expanding your audience and taking that in the room experience and busting it out and taking it out to a remote audience. Now, one of the things that I forgot to mention about these guys is that these guys really are the pioneers. I mean, they've been doing this for longer than we had the terminology figured out as to what this was. You know, I mean, we were calling it hybrid events. So I mean, this Will kind of alluded to. There's all kinds of words flying out there for this stuff. That it's live streaming. It's virtual, it's hybrid, it's remote broadcast, it's a webinar, it's, no, it's not a webinar, it's a webcast. So, I mean, can you guys go into a little bit about some of the differences between what these things are? Because we do tend to kind of lump them all into one bundle at this time. Martin, can you help us a little bit out with some of the terminology?
Yeah, okay. Yes. I mean, I'll come on. Yeah. I mean, all the words you've said, in various ways work or don't work. There's one word that I object to, and I'll come on to how I think things will change, but the word I object to is virtual, because people talk about virtual audiences because they are real people. They aren't CGI. They are people just as much as the ones sat in the room.
Right.
So I think that's one term that I'd like to see the end of completely.
Scratch that one off. Okay.
But as time goes on, and it is becoming more and more expected that there is an online presence for any major event. It's just happening de facto. And I think as that continues, I think we'll drop all this terminology. It'll just be that aspect of the event, the online aspect of it. They're all events, and we can forget about, is this a hybrid, is this remote? They're just events that happen to have an online presence as well as a physical presence. That's my view anyway.
So less so much about the technology or the terminology, but more just like that at some point every event's going to have some kind of an online component. It's just a question of how much, how little, and how much or how little of an in-room experience do we have as well. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think
the proportions.
I think you can have an online element within events, but to what degree that will depend on what you're seeking to achieve from that event as well. So this always boils back to whatever your objectives are, because you wouldn't do web streaming maybe of just a networking reception there. That would be a bit pointless, because what benefit would there be to anybody coming into that and just watching people eat and drink and meal around a room. So I think you have to, when you're looking at the online focus for these events, it really does have to be tailored according to what you want to achieve as the organizer or with the stakeholders, and also the delegate experience. What are they going to get? How are you going to have a really good remote experience in the same way that you can for people that you're used to seeing in a traditional sense? But it's always got to boil back to what are we doing? Why are we doing this element online when we maybe could do things a slightly different way? And I think that's one of the big things that we found over the last number of years, that some people grabbed onto this and said, right, okay, this is a fad, we've got to do it, this is a trend, we've got to do it, without really thinking, why are we doing it? And we've seen some terrible blunders because of that as well. So, these are great events to do, but I think it's always got to come back to the basics. What is it that you want as outcomes from this? And everything then can be designed around. With that information, you can actually then design some really nice programs, and everybody benefits.
I couldn't agree more. I think your thought process around this, like, yeah, I know, I snap like crazy is when I'm agreeing, and I have to mute myself because as I snap over you. But the idea of not grabbing onto a trend just because of it's a trend is just, I think, a godsend. I think we talk about every single year we do these trends articles that, like, hey, these are all great trends, things for you to be aware of, but don't just be like, okay, so our event's coming up, the top 10 trends are this. So how can we incorporate live streaming, virtual reality, within a mile diet food, like whatever it may be. And I think far too often, especially with live streaming, because it is a lot more complex than people think. People think it's just, hey, turn on a phone, start broadcasting in the world. It's a lot more complicated, and I think it ties back to what Martin said. I'm gonna totally, I don't want to jump because me, Martin, Paul, Brand have had all these discussions, I think, like a million times. But it's like, when you do it crappily, it ends up hurting you more than if it does. And I'm sure we're gonna talk about how not to do it crappily a little bit. So speaking of getting into live streaming, a lot of planners out there are wanting to do it, right? And they might be looking for a low-cost option to do it. And they might be wanting to just get their feet wet. They might want to give it a try. They said, this is something we want to do, but they're not ready to go on, ESPN, broadcaster, studio, pull up to their event, all the costs associated with all the high-end cameras, everything like that. But what's a low-cost way for someone to test if live streaming is going to work for their audience, or that, that basically getting out in front of that audience that they want to try to reach? What would you recommend to them? What options do they have? So Martin, I know you're very techie, like me. You figured out ways to do slides back before there was PowerPoint. How would you recommend for someone to get their feet wet in a low cost, easy to do option? Do you recommend the Periscope, put your phone up, or what do you recommend?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many options out there now. I mean, with stuff like Facebook Live, with YouTube live streaming, with the little, I don't know if you've seen the little Mevo camera that Livestream produce, with stuff like that around, then there are so many tools that enable you to get an event online very, very simply. What, of course, that doesn't allow you to do, they're all mechanical devices, they're all technologies that enable it. What it doesn't help you with is the, if you like, the approach you take, the strategy you take to find out if people are watching, if they're actively getting engaged, if they're becoming participants rather than viewers. And that's kind of, it's a bit like, if you take the physical event, it doesn't take much to book a hotel room and get the hotel to put a lectern up and get a speaker there and start talking to your audience. Where the skill is in how you figure out the messages that are going to be given, how they're going to be presented, the light and shade you build into the structure of the event, all those kind of things. And there's a parallel there, I think. The tools are there to enable it to be done very, very easily, but you still need to give a lot of time and thought and consideration to how you talk to people, and remembering that you're dealing with two, or at least two, very different audiences all of a sudden. in the early days, I saw that happen so often that a client would launch for the first time, they're live streaming their annual event, and they kick it off, and the chairperson would stand up and say, "This is amazing, we're live streaming to X hundreds of people around the country or around the world," and that would be the last time they're acknowledged for the rest of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's yeah, I mean, all those things you mentioned, Facebook Live, YouTube live streaming, the Mevo cameras, things like that, are all great little devices. But you've still got to really think about what you're trying to achieve and how best to do that with your audience's situation in mind, their specific, the environment they're watching and they're communicating with.
Paul, I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that. I mean, with these different kinds of levels, it's obviously very inexpensive to get in on the ground level, but there's something very different about a Facebook Live broadcast or something that's coming off a little piece of hardware versus some of the higher end things, different expectations, different audience mentalities. Can you expand a little bit about the difference between those kind of easy entry level stuff versus when we start to get into the higher stuff and the considerations that come along with it?
Yeah, I think if you just have a kind of what should we say, a kind of lower down kind of idea, which is just basically that you've got your product, and as Martin said, you put that in the room, and you're hoping that that's going to produce that amazing conference that the CEO is standing up and he's wanting to be positioned absolutely in the right space at the right time to go out across the globe, and you find that actually the kit that you're using really isn't up to it, then that's a big problem right there. But also, I think one of the issues is around the way in which you're looking to use whatever part of the design of the program he or she's going to be on, so that you get that absolutely right and it dovetails with everything else. So I think it's yes, you have the tech, but the design element is just as crucial, because if you get that wrong, then you're going to upset two different sets of we call them two different sets of participants. And I have seen this at events where you do get this kind of, I call it kind of participant envy, if you like, because there can be people in an event that feel, well, hold on, we're here, we're at the physical location, we're at this venue. These people that we can't see because they're remote participants, well, what are they doing, and where is their, what's their input? And I think there can be a risk of not getting that right. But also, the bigger risk is if strategically you haven't worked out why you are having that a set of remote delegates that chip into the event anyway. When are you going to start marketing to them? When are you going to invite them? And we know that there are some planners that will still make sure that they've got all of the people coming to the physical event that are sorted first before they will then say, okay, well, everybody else can come in remotely, which is fine to a degree, but is that the right way? So I think that in answer to your question, how do you take a kind of low level and then a high level? I think it's all related. It's not just about the degree of tech that you use, but it's also about that strategic thinking and that operational thinking that's going to enable you to design that program that is going to work for everybody and give your organization what it needs to go on and really keep its brand going, because in a positive way as well, because there are so many spin-offs that these events will create in terms of content that you can use and recycle and use time and again, and how you can use that to build up for the next event. How you can get sponsors to come in and say, look, we've just done this went out to all of these people, wasn't that amazing, and we're going to do it again next year. So I really think that the difference for me is the level in which you take your event seriously. So rather than it's a one-off, we're just going to push this out, hope it works, it's about digging deep and finding out what it is that's going to give you those great outcomes. So it's all tied in, but if you don't have poor technology, great design, or great design, great tech, but poor design isn't going to work either. So it's all got to be worked in together. And I think you need you need to buy in from all of the senior heads that are doing this, that have commissioned it, and not just giving it to, say, somebody further on down the kind of hierarchy that's told, go and put on this event and get us some new stuff, because that won't work. So I think there's a lot of strategic planning that needs to go on at the outset if you're going to do these. We've seen, Martin and I have seen so many events now where the marketing is just left so late for the remote delegates, and that causes its own set of issues, because what happens is that you're then on site, you're delivering the event, and no doubt the planner or somebody is coming up saying, well, we're not seeing too many, there aren't so many people on the viewing stats. Well, it's not really a surprise because you haven't told anybody about it until a day before. So I think if you're going to do these things well, then get all of the thinking together. It's not a tag on, it's got to be integrated right from the start.
Amen, brother. I mean, it keeps coming back to the strategy and the planning behind it and the why behind it. You touched briefly there on some of the FOMO aspects and things like that. And what it kind of occurred to me as you're talking about this, we're really talking about not only the difference between the audience of the in-room audience and the remote audience, but even subdivisions of the remote audience. That some of these, more Facebooky live type things, could be that casual, social, FOMO type generating thing where we're feeling kind of part of the action, but that's separate from now what we're kind of talking about in the more of the higher end rebroadcast remote audience, where we're really getting into the meat of the presentations of things. Because I've definitely seen where it's being promoted as as a remote audience type thing, but then it has been kind of that herky jerky phone in the corner, and that's a very different thing. And so setting those expectations, I think you guys really have a point about that we're dealing with multiple different audiences, and each one of those audiences needs to have their own kind of planning behind it. Let's kind of take it now to that second level, so away from the cheap and easy barrier of entry, but that when we now want to get into that more professional broadcast, and maybe Martin, you can elaborate a little bit on this, when we want to take it to that next level, really make it a quality remote audience broadcast, what do we need to do to start bringing in as far as equipment and planning and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's actually two completely separate sort of facets to this, really. You've got the technology that you use at the event to do the capturing and the encoding, that side of things. But I think it's very easy to forget the interface that the viewer is, or the remote delegate is accessing it through. And that's something that I've seen just pushed to the background. People get all wrapped up in, oh, we need these cameras and we need to do this and we need to do that. But it's vital that you've got a good user interface, a good viewer interface where they can see clearly what's going on. They can easily access it. You can control access to it in terms of whether it's you're charging people to get to it, or whether you just want to control the access to your employees, whatever the reason is. So that's kind of a vital side of it. But at the capture end of things, at the physical venue side, I think one of the other things that gets forgotten, and certainly things like the Livestream Mevo, which is a great little device. For those that don't know it, it's a 4K camera, which has built into it the ability to zoom it, pan and zoom. So basically within the camera you can choose your shots. So you can have a 2-shot cutting to a single shot, and you can play around with it, and it's all just done in one camera, which is great. But for the events industry, for the conference industry, generally you've got a huge percentage of the communication is going on screen. And you need to think about ways that you can actually capture that and bring it into the stream so that the viewer gets the best experience. It's no good just sticking a camera on the screen and thinking that's good enough, because it isn't good enough. People want to see the graphics, the videos. They want to see it in full resolution at full frame rates. So that's an important aspect to make sure that that's brought in well. And then simple things like camera positioning. It's not rocket science. It's what we've all done in events for so many years, but suddenly, or not suddenly, but often it just gets pushed to the background. Oh well, the camera can go anywhere. It's no, they need to have a good view. They need to have the perfect viewing angle, and then the remote viewer gets the experience of sitting in the front row. That's what you want.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah, definitely feel like you're in the front row. I think that's obviously the most ideal experience for sure. Paul, what other sort of things do you think that need to be included if you're ready to take the whole remote audience to the next level, make them feel good, whether it's equipment or software or anything like that that Martin hasn't mentioned?
Yeah, I think it would be for me. I think if you've got a host that's going to be your remote host, that's going to help the remote delegates through their whole journey. So, as Martin was saying about the viewer page and knowing how to get around whatever is coming up on their screen, so it's easy. They know where to go to ask the questions. They also know what all the hashtags are, so that they can help generate and spread the message as well. But where do they go? Do they just put a chat in a chat box? Do they put a question in the chat box? Do they put it on Twitter? Where do they go? Make it really nice and simple and straightforward. Don't have multiple channels, because otherwise it falls over. But have somebody that's able to be able to think on their feet, be able to deal with all of the stuff that goes on at live events, because that's a situation that they're going to be in. So that they can recap what's going on, they can preview what's coming up as well, and they can also do little offside interviews, so that when delegates that are in the actual venue go off for tea, coffee, whatever, that the remote delegates can have a different experience of, all right, well, we've stayed a bit longer with Paul and Martin because just gone off stage, they've done their speaking, let's talk about their book, or whatever it happens to be. That's a great way of making sure that you are engaged with the remote delegates. So I think that's really quite important to have somebody that's assigned, and then in addition to that, I would also have somebody that's moderating or looking at what's coming down on the social media side as well, because it's very hard to do two jobs at the same time and do them effectively. So if the host has got somebody that's able to pick out pieces from a moderator, that's quite useful as well. And just have another kind of runner around, because you can never have enough runners, but that's on the kind of people side. And then I think it comes back to understanding as well that if we want to take it up a level, what is the experience? Let's work our way through the remote delegate experience. What does that feel like? So you've worked it out for your delegates that are going to be on site, but what about the ones that can't make it? If you've got too much in the program, you're going to kill them with too much information. And if you've got too little, then as Martin said, when the CEO addresses the audience and that's the one and only time, you're going to lose them as well. So I think it's really important to sit in the seat of that remote delegate and have that kind of journey, that experience. What are they going to be going through? And I think if you combine all of those things, you've got the host that's taking you through, helping you understand how you get involved, what's coming up, what's been, where you can find the information, and if they're giving you links and things to things that you might have missed, because not all the remote delegates are going to be on all at the same time, then that's great, and they can do a kind of, this is news, this is what's coming up on the news, this is the news, this is what we've just done. If you do that during segments and you combine that with a program that works, then I think that takes it to a whole new level.
I think what I think really the objective is to, yes, get viewers, but then really give them every opportunity to become participants rather than just viewers. I think that's the step that needs to be taken.
Oh, I love that. I love taking them from being just a viewer to being a participant. I think that's huge, and I love the tactical advice you had of having a host just for the event. I had a client who wanted to basically do a live stream of their event, and they were really worried because the experience on site is this idea of getting free stuff and feeling the energy in the room. How do you do that and continue that on? And we talked about doing a side studio that you could cut back to when things that didn't make sense on the live end, on the video end, and the virtual end, and the live stream end. And I know I'm totally slaughtering with all the words. I'm so sorry. is that how can we make it so it's just as entertaining for those same people? I was going to offer, as the AV guy, nerd in the room, I was going to recommend some pieces of technology. If you are looking to take your live stream, you're looking to do it a little bit better. Some key elements, like you talked about cameras. I would definitely recommend at least 2 camera angles, because you can cut back and forth between the two. No one wants to see that one camera shot and that one angle the entire time. But if you can cut back and forth, adds a lot of energy. But then you introduce this new problem, which is how do you get the presenter or who's on stage to look at the camera to engage, because eye contact is huge, right? And one thing you should definitely ask of your AV company is this idea of tally lights, like tally, T-A-L-Y. It's basically whenever a camera is live, you've seen it in newsrooms, when the camera is live, it puts a light above. And just as simple as talking to presenters, making sure they're coached well enough to know, look at that red light, look at it as much as you can. And sometimes when the cameras are in the back of the room, the audience can't tell the difference between looking in the back of the room and looking at the camera, but the people will make a huge difference if you're looking right at the camera. So that was going to be my my one overlooked thing that I think gets overlooked a lot when it comes to live stream clients.
I'm going to jump in here because we did have a question come in from the audience that reflects one that I wanted to ask as well. It's circling back a little bit to some of the planning discussions that you guys were talking about, and when we're really getting into the why and the strategy and things like that. And that is, what are the things that are most likely overlooked by planners, when they're deciding to bring this as part of their event? So, as part of that strategizing and planning and thinking about these audience, in your experience, guys, what has been the thing that's been most likely overlooked?
Do you want that, Martin, or shall I?
No, I don't want that.
Okay. I'd say one of the things that's most overlooked is what Will was talking about with the speakers a moment ago. I really think that briefing the speakers and making sure that they understand that there is a remote set of delegates out there that need special attention as well to maximize their experience is one of the key things. So take, for example, if you have a conference and you have that idea that talk to the person next to you and share some ideas, and the speaker does that from the stage, well, they've got to translate that as well for the remote delegates, because if you don't, it falls over. So I really think that the speaker's understanding of how some of their exercises might or might not work, and if they don't work, then all right, bring them up, let's do a side interview or something. But it's all about understanding that there are other cameras so that they don't disappear off from a beautifully lit stage, which is great for everybody, into the darkness of the conference room, where suddenly they're in the middle of the delegate pack and all the remote delegates can't see them. So it's all of those little things. When you lose that speaker, then you're instantly going to lose the remote delegates as well. But the other big thing that's really overlooked, and I can't stress it enough, is make that decision about when you're going to market this thing strategically, and then tell everybody and get them excited about it, and what's going to be coming up. Because if you leave that to the last minute, you are really just wasting your time. I know I said it once, but I'll say it again. I might say it before the end of the show if that's all right. But the marketing is something that we just really need to get on point. And I think everybody needs to understand that if they've got remote delegates, then speakers and hosts and everybody else that's involved has to understand that as well. Which goes back to AV companies where the AV guys are maybe unaware that actually all the sound's been left on and there's nothing that's going on other than their conversation, and it's all being picked up and it's all being streamed. So
another hot one for you: timekeeping. It's
what do you mean by that?
Timekeeping. Yes. Good.
Yeah, for some. To my mind, it's unacceptable not to start an event on time for the physical audience, but it's completely unacceptable for the remote audience. And unless there's some method of communicating to them why it hasn't started. I had one last year. It was only an hour-long webcast. It was due to start, I think, at something like 9 o'clock in the morning. They promoted it. They got an audience there. The speaker it wasn't ready or something like that, and they started 20 minutes late. And we were using YouTube live streaming, and on YouTube live streaming you have an interface where you can see the number of viewers. And 10 minutes before we were due to go live, we saw this number creeping up. It's all looking good. We were meant to be live, and over the next 15 minutes, their audience just disappeared because they had not put in any kind of method of communicating to their audience. But quite honestly, to my mind, it's unacceptable that they didn't start on time anyway. So so they lost their audience.
Interesting. So it's like the equivalent of showing up in a venue and the doors are closed and you're not sure, you can't see what's going on inside. You're there at the event, you're on time. Whereas like if you with normal events, you enter into the room, you see there's music playing, there's people there, you're like, I'm in the right spot. It's almost like live stream. They're like, is this actually happening? So super solid point. Is there anything else, Martin, that you wanted to kind of chime in on? Sorry.
No.
I love it.
Not right now.
Well,
I'll just add to that, if that's all right. In terms of the timing, if you do find, though, that you are in a situation where there are things that are going a bit out of hand, then make sure that you can get on and access your website and update the program and do those kind of things and put messages out in whatever form you've agreed. Maybe it's social media, maybe it's something else, maybe it's internal comms. But if you keep people up to date, then that's okay. But leaving them in a big silence is never going to be helpful. And I remember we did a gig at EIBTM some years ago, and we had a few power problems. But it was okay because we could talk to the people in the room, and we kept everybody else aware of what was going on through social media. And okay, it wasn't ideal, but we didn't get any complaints because people knew what was happening. So I think whatever I see, if I tune in as a remote delegate at 3 o'clock on an afternoon, and what I'm looking at is totally different to what's on the program, then I'm going to turn off. But if that program has been updated, even though people are maybe a bit, maybe it's not according to plan, but it's been updated, then I've still got a chance of getting back on track. So keep talking, keep communicating with your delegates as well.
That's awesome. I think, like you said, the biggest thing is the communication end of it, for sure. Just making them feel like they're participants, not just viewers, for sure. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, kind of talking a little bit, we almost kind of started dipping our toes. Obviously, a lot of these overlooked things come from common scenarios. So this is going to be, I think, my favorite question that we had lined up, which is, can you tell us about the worst live streaming you've ever seen, ever? And not just like how it was bad, because obviously that's always fun to talk about, but how could they have done things better, and what was like overlooked? Why did this even happen? So let's go with Martin. I think you're ready with a story to tell of the worst live stream you've ever seen.
Well, it's going to come down to the worst marketing of a live stream I've ever seen, actually, which was a major corporate client put on an event. It was a major sporting event. It was a build-up to a major sporting event. I'm being very careful to avoid any names. And they booked an extremely large venue in London, and they had all these superstars there, and they wanted to stream it. I'm going back, must be some 7 or 8 years now. So it was quite early days, really, in terms of corporates doing this kind of thing. And they insisted that they were going to get many, many thousands of viewers for the duration of this 10-hour event. And so consequently, we booked a hell of a lot of bandwidth for the whole duration, which cost them many, many thousands of pounds to do. And they had, I think, something like 500 viewers over the course of the whole 10 hours. They had nobody turn up because they thought their brand was big enough that people would just find it. And they didn't. They put a post on their website somewhere, but it wasn't even on the homepage, and nobody found it, really. I mean, 500 people was for some organisations that's a good number, but for this organisation, no way. And it was a complete waste of money, really, because they just failed to meet any of their objectives because they didn't market it correctly. They just expected people would come along, and you just can't do that. It's hard. We all know it's hard enough to get people to physically attend events. That's a big ask. The issue with getting people to attend events remotely is it's very easy to just not show up.
Or to click it closed, yeah.
Yeah, because something else has happened, because there isn't the embarrassment factor. You've signed up for it, but nobody knows if you're there or not, really. It doesn't really matter. So it's very easy to just not show up or go off and do something else. So it's so vitally important that you've got to market the hell out of it, really get people to buy into it, realize it's an important event, make sure they're there, and then once they're there, keep them engaged, keep them involved, and give them ways that they can participate. Otherwise, it's all for nothing.
Well, Paul, it seems like Martin stole your third opportunity to mention marketing, so we'll let him take that. Do you have an example of one of your worst live streaming experiences that you've heard of or seen?
Not a particular one, but just I've seen so many events now where where it is feast and famine with the remote delegate experience, and it just makes me. Well, I don't know, it's just upsetting really that all the time and the energy has gone in, but it hasn't really gone in because it's still not really achieving anything. And I think that it comes back to, I think a lot of it does come back to the briefing that you do give the speakers about their understanding of what it is that's trying to be achieved. I've seen some speakers that don't even want to do side interviews at the end, so they're taken off. They've got the hostess or the host there trying to interview them about, some of the things that have come out, and they said, well, these guys maybe they're not paying, or maybe they're not here, so why should I give anything to them? I mean, that was a pretty bad one time. And also, if speakers don't understand that, their intellectual property is suddenly outside of that room as well, I think those can lead to maybe those things are suddenly discussed at the last moment, and it's, oh, no, okay, right, I want to focus just on the people that I can see. So to my mind, it's not respecting enough the fact that you've got another set of delegates to cater for that are going to help broaden your event, because a lot of the time those people that see it, that take part remotely, may easily go the following year if that opportunity is around, or they can still get involved in conversations along the way anyway, in terms of helping get the message out. So
I do have to throw one in as well, just because, and Paul, you might have even witnessed this because this goes back a ways, but my favorite one, and this isn't like the worst thing I've seen, but it was the funniest thing that I've seen, where a remote presenter was calling in and then somehow conferenced in his mom, who was calling on a separate channel. So, like, while he was giving his presentation, his mom called on Skype or whatever,
yeah.
And that came up. We won't say who it was. We won't say where it was. But it was
probably
hilarious. And just like, Mom, I'm trying to give a presentation right now. Can I call you back later?
Yeah.
It was one of the funniest things I've ever
Echo
seen.
drop-in, right? You can just drop into anybody's house and just all of a sudden start talking and viewing them. Oh, awkward.
It was so funny. So, guys, we're starting to wind down, but we want to make sure that we get kind of our final questions in as well. So we usually go with kind of a one tip that you have for event planners, but I'd like to even hone that point a little bit more and say, specifically, I loved when you started talking about some of the remote engagement stuff as far as the having the side interviews, having, the remote MC, things like that. If you could pick one tool for remote engagement, for really bringing that audience into the fold and making them feel part of it, and we'll have each one of you do one, what would that one tip be? So, Paul, let's start with you.
Oh, one tip. Yeah, I would embroider within the program a way of getting the remote delegates to be physically doing something, so that they can then send that down the wire and be part of the event. I remember there was one event that I think, can't remember, it might have been one of the original event camps, but I was actually in this office in the UK, and I thought, yeah, great, I can send a question down, I can send it via Twitter, and I did. And I remember seeing a few people in the room. I could actually see who was there. And I asked this question, and it was picked up by the social media moderator, and then she took it. I think she was probably the host as well for that event. Popped it up to the guy on the stage who was a speaker. He said, "Oh yeah, I don't really like that question because that's a tough one." He said something along those lines, and I had no. But because she'd said it's Paul from Planit, my mind was like, "Wow, I'm there. I'm in that event." And so whatever he said next didn't get through to me. But it was a simple act of being able to contribute towards it in some part in that event that really got me. So I think rather than just have speakers saying, right, okay, this is all my information, if they're asking for people to do exercises, then involve the remote delegates in a way that is possible these days so that you get their input as well. And then you will get that feeling of turning them from delegates into the participants. And then that gives a richness as well, because what comes out of those discussions can also feed into the room, and that gives other people in the room something extra as well. So it's getting your remote participants to actually take an action.
Well, one of my favorite things to do too is just call out random people in the audience, like Carrie Plowman, who's watching this episode right now live. I mean, I think when someone hears their name mentioned on the show, all of a sudden now I can see that Carrie is engaged in the show, and he's probably laughing right now because I can see this happening live on our screen. But it's true. I mean, when you call people out, they feel not only that like 15 seconds of fame, but they feel like, yeah, I'm there. Someone said my name, and people love to hear their name. So I think that's an amazing tip. What about you, Martin? What would be like your one tip, tool that you would use for live streaming for planners that have better live streaming?
I think it's really the communication about giving people a reason to stay with it and keep coming back, if it's a day-long thing or it's an hour or whatever, by constantly reminding them why they need to be there, what's coming up. I mean, you have it these days in TV programs, where after each ad break they tell you what's gone on, they tell you what's coming up. I think that's as long as people are just reminded, oh, this is why I'm here, this is what I need to stay for, that would be one thing. And the other thing is, it's not dissimilar to what Paul's saying, but using a tool. There's a number of tools software tools that you can use to do this, like Cover It Live or Slido or Poll Everywhere. A tool where they can actively contribute something very simply without having to speak or be on a camera or whatever, but just respond to a poll, answer a question, ask a question. Having that facility, I think, is absolutely vital. Otherwise, if you're not going to get people to participate in that way, then why do it live? They might as well just be watching a video. So, yeah, participation is everything.
I'm going to piggyback on that one too, because that was actually, I want to jump in with one of my favorite tools, which was, and you mentioned it already, is Slido. We probably use it for all of our live stream clients, and the reason why, you may have heard of Slido, you may use it at your events on the offline, but the one thing I love about it is that you can embed a live stream on the page. So you were talking about, earlier I believe Martin or Paul, one of you, was talking about the experience of viewing it. And a lot of times it's type in this complicated URL, click on this email, do this, this, and this, where like we tell our live stream audience, all you have to go to slido.com, enter the keyword. For some of our clients, they have passwords that they have to enter. They enter a password, and then boom, the live stream comes up, and then there's a question panel right on the right-hand side. And it's super clean. You can view it on your phone, everything. I think the reason why I'm endorsing it is because we use it all the time. And I think it's one of the cleanest experiences bringing those two together, but also doesn't require a lot of tech. You don't have to custom create a landing page. You don't have to do all this stuff. It just integrates. It works perfectly. If you have a poll, it automatically switches a poll. It's awesome. So that was my one plug that I wanted to give. So, Brant, did you have any tips that you wanted, anything that you've enjoyed that you've used when you've been on a live stream?
Not on the tip side. I mean, it's these guys have nailed it. I mean, we kind of started with the book, and we'll start wrapping up here. And I just want to re-mention the book, Remotely Engaging by Martin and Paul. It really is. It's clear, it's concise, it's simple, and it gives you a lot of these tips to engage with that audience. Because I think you're right. I think it's one if you're just going to sit back and watch. Then you could just be watching a pre-recording or something along those lines and just release it later. There's no point to be live if you're not going to be engaging actively. Involving them in Q&A is one that's always nice, and you can do that through a Slido or something like that. But just being able to, like you said, Paul, get that your voice gets out there, and you feel like you're a part of the event somehow, some way. So, obviously, a lot of the book is dedicated to that. So, yeah, if you're not going to engage, then you might as well just broadcast it later.
Awesome. Well, Brent, you want to kind of wrap us up with? Whoa! Oh, wait. I'm going to wrap us up.
Yeah.
My favorite question. I get
Bring it.
I got really excited. I was going to give up my question. So my favorite question is what are your favorite cool resources, websites, blogs, and everything that you have to share? So this is your chance to share everything and anything that you love, whether it's live stream, event related or not. I'm going to share something this week, non-event related, but still very cool. So I'm going to kick it off with Paul. Why don't you tell us about your favorite resources?
Ooh, well, they come from a variety of sources. So, I mean, I read a lot of online publications. So there isn't one in particular that is on the kind of, this is the main, this is the must-do, because, I take it from a variety. But Michelle Bruno's blog, like that, that's all about the event tech, which is good. But, yeah, I just keep reading a lot of stuff, really. So there isn't anything in particular. Yeah, sorry. I don't have one that you can just go to and say, right, that is the one. Because I think that in our event space, and with so many different views coming on, there are some great things that you can pick up. You read BizBash, you've got great stuff in there. You read some of the UK, European publications you've got. So I like reading from all across different points of the globe, because I think that helps with understanding.
Awesome. So Michelle Bruno's blog, BizBash, kind of like two of your favorites out of there,
Yeah.
But definitely it sounds like you're snagging them up all the time. So maybe we'll hopefully maybe grab some more of your favorites, or maybe we'll post the Paul's list of favorite blogs on the show notes.
Michelle's blog is eventtechbrief.com. I just wanted to double check and make sure I got it right. So eventtechbrief.com, we'll put that in the notes as well for Michelle Bruno, and I can also heartily recommend that one.
Definitely. Martin, what about you? What are your favorite resources? Books, blogs, gadgets, anything?
Yeah. Well, I'm a bit of a geek, so I've got three quick ones for you. I like new things as well. One of the challenges we have with clients is measurability. How many people watched, how long they watched for. That's the magic ingredient, really, which is still quite a challenge to get really meaningful statistics. Yeah, you can use Google Analytics and things like that, but it's still not quite there. But there's this new service called limbic.com, Limbik, which is really interesting and gives you really quite in-depth analytics about how long people watch for, but also, was the audio turned up? Were they watching it full screen? All these kind of things. It's really quite interesting. It's very early days and it's developing, but it's looks like a really, really interesting development. And the best thing is it's free. So.
Gotta love free.
At least for now, right?
The second one, which I'm really quite excited about, is I think it was June. YouTube announced their new format VR 180, which is virtual reality 180. It's half the sphere rather than the full sphere, which for us in events is much more interesting, really, I believe, because who cares about what's going on behind you? And the virtual reality aspects of it, where clients are perhaps in the surgical field, where they're doing demonstrations, some physical demonstrations, the ability to have that in 3D is obviously hugely appealing. But the neat thing, as far as I can see, and again, it's early days with this, but from what little I found out about it, is that if you're not viewing it through a VR headset, you still get a standard, you get a high definition video that looks right on the page. So, it works whether you're viewing in a virtual reality set or just conventionally. So that's pretty cool.
Awesome.
And the third one is a thing called speechmatics.com, which I've just done a little bit of experimenting with it. It's an automatic transcribing, subtitling facility, which I did a little test a few weeks ago, and unlike automatic speech recognition stuff I experimented with before, this seems to be really quite accurate, and it's very, very fast. So that's quite interesting, and it's pretty low cost as well. So, and I think that's an area, subtitling and captioning is something which theoretically every video on the internet, by law, certainly in Europe, should be subtitled. Very few of them are, but I think it's an area that increasingly we need to address. So.
Absolutely. And what's great about Event Icons, we subtitle our shows too, because sometimes you can't watch it as audio, or you have trouble understanding what someone said, and I think definitely need to have it these days, and it's getting cheaper, and with technologies like this, there's no brainer for sure.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. I love it. I had one cool resource I wanted to share. Literally got a notification about this like an hour ago, but Nest, the people behind the Nest thermostat that you may know, the Nest smoke detector, Nest cameras, owned by Google, just recently announced a new product, two new sets of products. One is a security system, so you'll be able to have your traditional door sensors, everything, and also tie into the cameras, but also they announced a doorbell. So if you're familiar with the Ring doorbell or the August doorbell, they have their own too. So Nest is slowly taking over the home automation game, giving you more simple to use things. So for people, I know it's not necessarily event tech related, but a lot of us are away from home for long periods of time, and we're looking for ways to make our lives a little bit easier. I'm a huge home automation nerd, so I want to share one of the cool things I saw just got released today.
Brilliant.
Brant, what about you? You got a cool resource to share today?
Well, I was going to welcome iPhone users to the wireless charging generation, something that Android's been able to do for many, many years now. Not that I'm being snarky about it, but I think it is great. I mean, what that's going to be is there's going to be a lot of cool things for events as far as like charging mats and things like that. But I changed it at the last minute, and I am going with a book because we started talking about the magic of hearing your own name. And it reminded me that I had read this book by Tim David, who I think I saw at an event and said, I like this guy, I'm going to buy his book. It's called Magic Words, The Science and Secrets Behind 7 Words That Motivate. And it's one of these kind of almost Carnegie-esque like books where it really gets into how these very simple words affect us in very powerful ways. And he is actually a magician as well. So he uses these as part of his craft, but then realized that there was more of a business possible use for these types of things. So it's nothing evil, it's nothing bad, but that's one of them. One of the magic 7 words is using someone's name. So using their name and using it appropriately and not too often, but often, is one of the magic words. Yep, you're so right.
Brant.
Well, thank you for agreeing.
Thank you, Brant.
So but it reminded me of that, and it's a good book. It's on Audible as well. So if you're more of an audio listener, feel free to listen to it on there. So speaking of which, Martin, Paul. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. The name of the book again is Remotely Engaging.
Magic Words.
It's Magic Words.
Yeah.
Remotely Engaging. I meant their book. Yeah.
Yeah, their book is much.
I get
awesome.
mine in here too. I'll show. Yay!
At least we sold 4 copies.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Very good. So encouraging people to go check that out, definitely.
I was going to say just really quick before Brant wraps, I want to thank you both. Again, I'm fangirling a little bit on the inside, so thank you guys both for being on the show. It's just a huge honor to have you both on here.
Thank you for
a pleasure. Great fun.
So that starts to wrap it up for another episode of Event Icons. Paul, where can people find out more about you and what you're up to?
Ooh, they can go to 3ws.planit, spelled with an I, .biz, or they can go to my own micro website, which is 3wspaulcook.co.uk.
Very good. Martin?
BeThereGlobal.com.
BeThereGlobal.com. Keep it simple. All right. Very good. Very good. Well, thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate it, and thank you all for joining us out there. We do hope you can join us live whenever you're able, because that just adds to the conversation, and we can add your questions in for our guests. So if you can watch us live, be sure and stop by eventicons.com, event-icons.com. Make sure we get that in there where you can sign up and join the GoToWebinar as we do these weekly. If you're not able to join us live, we do offer the iTunes feed is back up and running. So if you want to subscribe on iTunes, feel free to do it there. However, if you want the most fresh edition of Event Icons, be sure and join us live or check out the blog, event-icons.com, where they'll be posted usually about a week later.
Yeah, a week later. And then we post iTunes 2 weeks later. So yeah, definitely the fresher version is on the blog.
And as Will mentioned, there's going to be transcripts involved in there, as well as putting in subtitles and things like that. So we want to make sure everyone's taken care of as well. So, did I forget anything, Will?
Nope, I think you are good to go, Brant.
All right. Great. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us on Event Icons. We will see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another transcription and all of the resources mentioned. Head to www.helloendless.com/blog. This week's episode will be posted and available by next Tuesday. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway and join the Twitter conversation sponsored by Alex Plaxton and Little Bird Told Media. Just tag your post with #EventIcons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #EventIcons.